In the previous video, it was confirmed that the Grim Reaper, in his past life, was the king responsible for the death of the goblin's entire family. This revelation creates a strong tension when Kim Shin confronts him. However, since the Grim Reaper doesn't remember his past, the goblin, saddened by the loss of an important friend, decides to walk away. From now on, we will refer to the Grim Reaper as Wang Yeo, his name as a king, since Wu Bin was a name he invented because he couldn't remember his own. In the next scene, the goblin returns home and asks the protagonist to pack her things, as they will be moving to a house that belonged to President Yu. However, upon arriving at the residence, Eun-tak announces that she will stay with Sunny. When the two are together, the protagonist explains to her what is happening between the goblin and the Grim Reaper. Remember the Grim Reaper that the lost soul sought out? It was confirmed that she was conspiring with the man who wanted to remove Kim's son from his path. The lost soul warns her, saying he won't report her for using her powers for personal gain, as it would certainly get the Grim Reaper punished. However, it's clear that she owes him one. Later, the lost soul visits Sunny, but she cannot see him. Wang Yeo, on the other hand, can see him and, wearing his hat to remain unseen by his beloved, confronts his enemy. The Grim Reaper reveals that he now understands what the lost soul truly is, a demon that feeds on the negative energy of the people he can manipulate. With this revelation, we see all the times Jung Hyun crossed paths with the protagonist, starting much earlier than we imagined. He was the one controlling the person driving the vehicle that hit Eun-tak's mother and was responsible for several accidents that could have taken the girl's life as well. Later, the Grim Reaper visits the protagonist at college and gives her the ring that belongs to Sunny, the same one that caused this beautiful couple's destinies to cross again. However, he says something intriguing, that Sunny won't remember him. You might recall that Wang Yeo used his powers the day they kissed to bring back her memories of their past life, intending for her to forget him. But as we saw that she still remembers everything, apparently the power didn't work. Moving on to our bright sun, Sunny visits the goblin to try to organize her thoughts, as many new things have suddenly entered her life. Just like the day she died in her first life, Sunny tells her brother that if he wants to move forward, she supports him, even if it means going after the Grim Reaper. This time, Kim Shin doesn't intend to die along the way. Returning to the Grim Reaper, he is summoned to the tea house, but now as a client. The internal audit team summoned him to punish Wang Yeo for using his powers for personal reasons, such as erasing a certain human's memories, failing to complete paperwork on a lost soul, and sharing the soul's cards with the goblin, among other things. Regarding the punishment, the Grim Reaper will have his memories restored, as he chose to erase them himself. Living with them will be his burden. We then return to the past to see what happened to the king after the canonical event. Wang Yeo stopped listening to Jung Hyun, leading the man to order a maid, who is now a Grim Reaper, to serve herbal tea to His Majesty. This mix contains small amounts of poison, which would lead to the king's demise, just like his relatives. Despite many years passing since his wife's death, the king still suffered from the loss. One day, while wandering the city desolate, wanting only to rid himself of what she wore that day, we see him giving the ring to a lady, the same woman in red we see in the present. In the next scene, we see the king unable to bear his current condition any longer. One day, he asked the maid, now a Grim Reaper, to serve him more of that drink because he didn't want to live past that night. For taking his own life and other crimes, His Majesty received a punishment of 600 years. Returning to the present day, besides regaining his memories, the Grim Reaper can no longer use his abilities or perform his duties until further instructions are given. As a side note, I don't recall mentioning the significance of the ring. It was a way for Kim's son to show she was on the king's side, not her brother's. With that said, His Majesty ordered his wife to wear it, and now that he remembers everything, Wang Yeo feels guilty for giving the same ring to Sunny in this life. Later, the goblin finds the Grim Reaper in his room, looking at the scroll with Kim's son's face on it. Of course, Kim Shin is furious, but knowing that Wang Yeo is now being punished with the return of his memories comforts him in a way. Returning to our protagonist, the lost soul visits Sunny again, and this time Eun-tak is at work with her. When Jung Hyun starts approaching, threatening to end Sunny's life, the protagonist only thinks of protecting her. She covers her boss's body, and at that moment, the mark of the goblin on Eun-tak's neck somehow repels the lost soul. However, the girl faints afterward. We see that Sunny decides to take the protagonist home, and the girl is already conscious. Before entering the residence, Eun-tak asks her boss to go ahead because she wants to talk to the goblin. During their conversation, he mentions that the mark on his beloved's neck seems to be fading. This worries Kim Shin because if it disappears completely, he fears it will prevent him from protecting her. Knowing about the encounter with the lost soul and the girls, the goblin asks Eun-tak to take care of herself a little longer, as he and the Grim Reaper will put their differences aside in the next 2 days to try to save them from this menace. In the next scene, we finally see Wang Yeo completing the paperwork on Jung Hyun being a lost soul. He then hands the documentation to his fellow Grim Reaper, who always helps him when asked, to file it. At this moment, his attention shifts to someone else. His colleague knows about Eun-tak being the goblin's bride and took over the work that belonged to Wang Yeo. Thus, he received the next card indicating the day the girl would die, and we discover that the protagonist has only 1 more week. In the following scene, Wang Yeo brings the information to the goblin about Eun-tak. During their conversation about what happened in the past between the king and the general, Kim Shin realizes that the sword in his chest is the key to ending the lost soul. In the coming days, Wang Yeo starts watching Sunny from a distance, and I couldn't help but chuckle a bit. He looks like the protagonist from You, following her everywhere. Of course, Sunny senses his presence and can see him, as Wang Yeo cannot use his hat to hide. Thus, Sunny decides to open up at the place where they met in this life, on the bridge where they found the ring, and she says she remembers him. At this moment, Wang Yeo is confused because he had used his powers, but since he told his beloved to keep only the happy memories, Sunny explains that even in moments of sadness, she was happy just to have him near, whether in this life or the previous one. However, Sunny adds that she doesn't want to love him this time, so she returns the ring to him and ends their relationship for good. Meanwhile, our main couple plans a trip together. The goblin knows his end is near due to the situation involving the sword and the lost soul, so he wants to enjoy a few more moments with his beloved. In the next scene, we see the moment arrives to lure Jung Hyun. The protagonist is taken to the rooftop of a building, and there the goblin instructs her to summon him as soon as the lost soul approaches. In their farewell, Kim Shin gives Eun-tak a beautiful kiss. Soon after, the lost soul appears, but something unexpected happens. The protagonist can no longer see him, just as she can't see ghosts, and Jung Hyun was waiting for this moment to use her. However, being clever, Eun-tak realizes that the lost soul intends to enter her body to remove the goblin's sword and end him. Fortunately, the protagonist manages to summon her beloved, and as soon as he appears, she informs Kim Shin about Jung Hyun's plan. Nonetheless, the lost soul enters Eun-tak's body, and as soon as he places his hands on the sword in the goblin's chest, the Grim Reaper appears. Wang Yeo cannot use his powers as a Grim Reaper, but he disregards the orders and uses them to extract Jung Hyun from the protagonist's body. In any case, the goblin needs the sword to end the lost soul, and as it leaves his beloved's body, the girl faints. Holding Eun-tak's hands on the sword's hilt, he endures immense pain to pull it from his chest. And then, he vanquishes Jung Hyun. The lost soul's words are painful even for us viewers, as the man wasn't wrong when he said that even in his end, he achieved his goal of defeating the goblin. Now, we witness Kim Shin's end as he gradually disappears with the protagonist embracing him. Before he completely vanishes, he tells Eun-tak that he will come with the rain and the first snowfall, his wish to the Almighty. As the goblin departs, everyone who knew him seems to have had him erased from their memories, and even Kim Shin's notes are shown to have disappeared. Knowing this could happen, Eun-tak hurriedly grabs a notebook and writes down some characteristics of her beloved, along with his name and the promise he made to her. In the next scene, we see where the goblin has gone. He has finally been freed from his punishment, yet he chooses to continue existing as the wind, the rain, the first snowfall, rather than resting eternally. Now we turn to that lady, who is also the woman in red. She is recounting the goblin's story to the man who is the reincarnation of General Kim Shin's soldier. The lady speaks of the goblin being left alone, trapped between this life and the afterlife for all eternity. Even she wonders what the end of this story will be. Will the goblin forever wander in his futile choice? 9 years later, we see that Eun-tak has become a radio producer, and she doesn't remember the time spent with Wang Yeo. After all, their friendship only developed because of the goblin, so when they cross paths, the protagonist only associates him with the memory of when she was young, and he came for her as a lost soul, but since they don't converse, she thinks she's mistaken. Eun-tak continues to wear the necklace she received from her beloved, even without knowing its significance, and on her more pensive days, she wonders if it was a gift left by her mother. At least, our protagonist maintains her friendship with Sunny, and we see she has also grown closer to another person, the girl who was her schoolmate and brought the college entrance exam results to the goblin years ago. The ghosts still remember Kim Shin and that Eun-tak is the goblin's bride, but now they've changed her nickname to the goblin's widow, because even though the protagonist doesn't remember her beloved, she never became interested in anyone else and has lived these 9 years with a great sadness in her heart, the reason for which she cannot comprehend. On her birthday, Eun-tak makes a wish for someone to save her and help her remember why she is in this darkness. Coinciding with the first snowfall, the goblin returns. Wasting no time, he immediately embraces her. At this moment, the protagonist is also moved, yet she doesn't fully understand why, as her memories with this stranger haven't returned. After the initial emotion passes, Eun-tak bombards him with questions. To let her continue living in peace, at least, that's what the goblin thinks she's doing, Kim Shin decides to leave the couple's past open for his beloved. Later, the goblin goes to where Deok-hwa is, and neither the boy nor the secretary remembers him, as expected. This time, Kim Shin tries to explain who he was to his nephew, but the two think he's a madman. When it comes to Sunny, he only watches her from afar. However, the Grim Reaper remembers his friend. The scene shifts, revealing that the woman in red had a hand in this. She asked the Almighty to let Wang Yeo retain his memories, at least, because everyone else would suffer from a void they couldn't understand or fill. The goblin explained to the Grim Reaper that he had the opportunity to return because of the contract he signed with the protagonist the first time they tried to remove the sword from his chest. Now, after many years, Wang Yeo finally apologizes for everything he made him go through. Afterward, the Grim Reaper helps update his friend's old-fashioned style, and in the end, they return to the house that belonged to the goblin. However, while they're conversing, Deok-hwa unexpectedly appears, confused about how his tenant knows the strange man who appeared earlier calling him nephew. To resolve this confusion, the Grim Reaper has to use his powers, which is fine because he's already back at work. Returning to the protagonist, at her job, she made a typo about the temperature, leading her to receive a scolding from her boss. However, her colleagues are surprised when they open news websites and realize that despite her mistake, Eun-tak accurately predicted the weather. What is even stranger to them is that the cherry blossoms began to bloom in the middle of winter, and when the protagonist goes outside to confirm, she encounters Kim Shin. Later, another bizarre event occurs. As soon as she blows out a candle in a cafe, Kim Shin appears right in front of her. The woman even buys him a drink but makes it clear that she doesn't want to see him anymore. After all, it's strange for someone to talk about you as if they've known you for a long time, especially when you don't remember anything. Continuing with the goblin's new life, he constantly has to ask the Grim Reaper for money. Tired of this and unable to make gold bars anymore, since without a serial number, they are considered illegal, Kim Shin turns to his last option, talking to Deokwa and the secretary. Even though they don't remember who the goblin is, President Yu's will stated that if someone named Kim Shin ever appeared, the assets should be transferred to him. However, since the company doesn't interest him, the goblin leaves it to his nephew. The next day, Kim Shin appears at the same place as the protagonist, and since he's there, the two end up leaving together to talk. Untak finds his pursuit of her very strange and warns him that next time, she'll call the police. However, to defuse the situation, the goblin explains that he's a fan of hers and would like to sponsor her show so that Untak won't be fired due to a lack of investors. With her work continuing, the protagonist's new show will focus on bringing people together. For example, if you have a story and are looking for someone involved in it, you send it to the radio, and they'll try their best to connect those searching for each other. In the next scene, we see that a letter addressed to one of the girls was sent to Sunny's old fried chicken shop, and Deokwa takes it to his uncle's. However, since the goblin needs to give Untak some space to avoid scaring her, he tells the Grim Reaper to take the letter to Sunny, using it as a great excuse for Wang Yeo to see his beloved. Unfortunately, every time the Grim Reaper went to the shop, Sunny wasn't there, so he decided to leave the letter with an employee. But do you think he really wouldn't see her? As he was heading home, they crossed paths on the street, but unfortunately, nothing happened beyond a glance. Later, we see Sunny delivering the letter to the protagonist. Could it be the one she wrote in Canada? Well, Untak doesn't remember doing something like that, so when she reads the contents, it's confirmed that yes, it is the letter she wrote in the country. Summarizing what's written, Untak tells her mother that she can finally be at ease about the protagonist's gift of seeing ghosts, as it allowed her, at that time, to meet a very special person who cared about her well-being. Now, everything becomes even more confusing for young Untak, as she can't wrap her head around the fact that she might have done this, especially since she doesn't even have a passport. Despite everything, her handwriting doesn't lie, it was she who wrote it. Untak thinks it might be about that man mentioned in her notebook, a certain Kim Shin, as he is the only person in her life who seems to have been erased. But her thoughts are interrupted when she receives a call from the goblin. She had left her contact with the secretary to pass on to the stranger who helped sponsor her show, because despite how different the man was, she wanted to thank him. Thus, a meeting between the two is arranged, and during their conversation, we discover that Untak is going on vacation. Could our girl be heading to Canada, and will we see that vision of the goblin happening? Well, in the next scene, we see the protagonist in the country. Looking to learn more about the hotel where she received the letter, Untak discovers it was built by a Korean and that the letter was only delivered now because when they were fixing the box where they are placed, the envelope fell. Later, while strolling through the city, the protagonist ends up encountering the goblin, who exits the door he uses to access the country just as she passes by. Of course, her first thought is that the man is following her, but somehow, which Untak can't explain, she sympathizes with this stranger. In any case, the protagonist had promised to buy him a meal the last time they met, so this was the perfect opportunity for Kim Shin to collect. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, please like and share to help me out. Until next time.